Silas lived a life measured in silence. His cabin sat at the edge of a great, northern wilderness, a small wooden anchor against an ocean of trees. He was 72 years old, and the lines on his face told the story of a long life, much of it spent alone since his wife had passed. He felt the quiet not as an absence, but as a presence, a constant companion in the whispering pines and the crackle of his wood stove. The world of men, with its noise and hurry, was a distant memory, a story he no longer felt a part of. His days followed a simple, unwavering rhythm. He rose with the pale morning light. He chopped wood for the coming cold. He tended the small patch of earth where he grew his vegetables. He sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sun bleed through the canopy, listening to the forest settle into night. It was a predictable life, a fortress of routine he had built around his solitude. He asked for nothing more. But for the past few weeks, the silence had changed. It had acquired a new texture, a depth he did not recognize. At the edge of hearing, just as he drifted to sleep, a sound would rise from the deep woods. It was not the howl of a wolf or the cry of a mountain lion. It was lower, more resonant, a call filled with a profound and ancient melancholy. He started to feel it during the day, too. A prickling sensation on the back of his neck as he worked his garden. The distinct feeling of being watched. He would turn, scanning the dense wall of green and shadow, but he saw nothing. Only the impassive faces of the ancient trees stared back. He dismissed it as the fancy of an old man whose only company was himself. Then came the physical signs. A thick branch, nearly the width of his thigh, snapped clean in two about 10 feet from the ground. He had found it on his morning walk. No wind could have done that. No bear he had ever seen could reach that high with such force. He had run his hand over the splintered wood, his mind refusing to connect the sound, the feeling, and the evidence. It was easier to believe it was an anomaly, a strange act of nature he simply did not understand. One afternoon, the familiar sounds of the woods were shattered. The distant, mournful call was gone. In its place was a new sound, one that traveled on the wind with a terrible clarity. It was a grunt, a low, guttural noise of effort, followed by a sharp, ragged exhalation of pain. The rhythm was agonizingly regular. A struggle, a fight against something unseen. Silas felt a cold dread mix with a reluctant curiosity. His first instinct was to bolt the door and feed the fire, to pretend he had heard nothing. But the sound was not one of rage or aggression. It was the universal sound of suffering, a sound he understood in his own aging bones. He could not ignore it. He went inside and took the old rifle from its pegs above the mantel. It was heavy in his hands, the wood worn smooth by his father's grip and his own. He did not take it to hunt. He took it for the same reason a man carries a walking stick on an uneven path. It was a small piece of assurance against the vast and sudden unknown. He followed the sound, moving deeper into the woods than he had in years. The air grew cooler under the dense canopy. The forest floor was a soft carpet of pine needles, muffling his footsteps. The grunts grew louder, closer. They led him toward the rocky creek bed that marked the edge of his property, a place of moss-covered boulders and deep, perpetual shadow. And then he saw it. His mind stuttered, struggling to process the image before him. Slumped against a colossal gray boulder was a creature from myth. It was massive, easily 9 feet tall even in its seated position. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur the color of dark earth and old blood. Long, powerful arms rested on its thighs, the hands large enough to palm his head like a fruit. It was a monster, a beast of legend. Every story he had ever heard, every whispered tale from his childhood, rushed into his mind. But the reality of it was far different from the fiction. The creature was not a rampaging terror. It was a victim. Its left leg was trapped. A huge, illegal bear trap, the kind with cruel, serrated steel jaws, was clamped deep into the flesh above its ankle. The heavy chain was bolted to the rock itself, an anchor of obscene cruelty. The creature's struggle, the rhythmic grunting, was its desperate, futile attempt to pull its mangled limb free from the metal teeth. Silas froze. The rifle felt useless in his hands. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to retreat to the safety of his cabin and forget what he had seen. This was a power of the forest he was never meant to witness. Its world and his were never meant to intersect. To stay was madness. But then the creature turned its head. It had heard him, or smelled him. Its eyes found his. They were not the flat, mindless eyes of a beast. They were deep and dark, and in their depths, he saw a startling, terrifying intelligence. And beneath that intelligence, he saw an agony so profound it stole his breath. In that moment, the creature ceased to be a monster. It was simply a being, caught and suffering. His fear did not vanish, but something else rose to meet it. Compassion. A simple, undeniable empathy for another's pain. He could not leave it like this. He slowly, deliberately, lowered the rifle and leaned it against a tree. He raised his empty hands, palms forward. "I will not hurt you," he whispered. The words were quiet, swallowed by the vastness of the woods, but he felt the creature watch the intent behind them. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the creature. It watched him go, a low rumble vibrating in its chest. It was a sound of warning, but also of exhaustion. Silas returned to his cabin, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His mind was a storm of disbelief and purpose. He gathered what he would need: a heavy steel pry bar from his shed, an old, thick blanket, and a bucket filled with clean, cool water from his well. When he returned, the creature was in the same position, its great head now bowed. The energy for its earlier struggles was gone. It looked defeated. Silas approached with a slow, measured pace, making no sudden moves. He set the bucket of water down just within its reach, then placed the pry bar and blanket on the ground a few feet away. He retreated to a safe distance, to the base of a large pine, and he sat. He just sat and waited. He wanted it to understand that he was not a threat. He was not the one who had set this cruel device. The hours passed. The sun crept across the sky, its light slanting through the trees. The creature drank the water, scooping it with one of its huge, dark hands. It watched him the entire time. As evening began to settle, painting the forest in shades of purple and gray, a change came over the creature. It stirred, a renewed urgency in its movements. It tried to shift its weight, to find a new angle against the trap. The metal jaws shifted, biting deeper. A terrible cry, half roar, half sob, tore from its throat, echoing through the silent woods. Silas knew he could wait no longer. He stood up and retrieved the pry bar. He had to get the trap off. He approached again, his steps slow and deliberate. "I am here to help," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. He was within 10 feet when the creature's arm shot out. Its hand closed around his forearm. The grip was immense, a vice of muscle and bone. He felt the sheer, terrifying power in it, a force that could snap his arm in two with a simple flex. He felt the coarse texture of its fur, smelled the scent of damp earth and pine and something else, something wild and ancient. He froze completely. He did not pull away. He did not cry out. He simply stood there, captured, his heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. He looked from the massive hand encircling his arm to the creature's face. He met its gaze, holding it steady. In his own eyes, he hoped it would see his truth. He had no weapon. He had no malice. He had only a desire to end its suffering. Time seemed to stop. The forest held its breath. The only sound was the rush of blood in Silas's ears. Then, slowly, miraculously, the pressure lessened. The crushing grip softened, becoming a hold, then a touch. The creature released his arm. It had seen him. It had understood. With a great, weary sigh, the creature laid its head back against the boulder. It shifted its body slightly, exposing the trap more fully, giving him clear access. It was a gesture of complete surrender, a profound act of trust. Silas went to work. The spring on the trap was monstrously strong. He wedged the end of the pry bar between the steel jaws and put his entire weight into it. The metal groaned in protest. The creature remained unervingly still, its breath coming in soft, pained grunts each time the trap shifted. Sweat beaded on Silas's brow, stinging his eyes. His muscles screamed with the effort. For what felt like an eternity, he fought against the cold, unyielding steel. Finally, with a sudden, deafening snap, the jaws sprang open. The leg was free. The creature let out a low, shuddering moan and slowly, carefully, drew its wounded limb back. The injury was horrific. The flesh was torn and bleeding, the bone likely fractured. Silas took the old blanket and gently laid it over the wound, a clumsy, inadequate bandage. The creature allowed the touch. It then did something that shook Silas to his very core. It looked at its freed leg, then looked directly at him. It lifted its enormous right hand, not in aggression, but in a slow, deliberate gesture. It placed the hand flat against its own broad chest. It held it there for a long moment, its dark eyes locked with his. It was a communication beyond language, a sign of gratitude, of respect. Then, it lifted its head and let out a call. It was the same deep, resonant sound he had heard in the nights before, but this time it was different. It was not a call of loneliness, but a summons. And the forest answered. From the deep shadows between the trees, two other shapes emerged. They were silent, moving with a grace that defied their size. Another adult, nearly as large as the first, and a smaller one, a juvenile. Its family. They had been there the whole time. Watching. Waiting. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, their presence immense and overwhelming, their dark eyes fixed on the small, old man. The two newcomers moved to the side of the injured one. They helped it to its feet, supporting its weight as it leaned heavily upon them. The pain was evident in its every movement, but it was free. They began their slow retreat back into the wilderness from which they came. Before it was swallowed by the shadows, the one Silas had helped stopped and turned its head. It looked back at him, across the small clearing, and for a final, fleeting moment, their eyes met again. In that gaze, a silent pact was sealed, an acknowledgement of a debt, a shared secret that would now bind them forever. Then it turned and was gone. The three figures melted into the forest, vanishing as if they were nothing more than dissipating smoke. The silence that descended upon the creek bed was heavier than before. It was a silence filled with the weight of what had just happened. Silas stood alone, trembling slightly, the pry bar still clutched in his hand. The only evidence of the encounter was the discarded, ugly trap and a few dark stains on the moss. He felt a profound sense of awe and a deep, aching solitude. He had touched another world, and now he was back in his own, forever changed. He picked up the heavy trap and began the long walk back to his cabin. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never speak of this to another living soul. The secret was not his to tell. It belonged to the forest. Years passed. The memory of the encounter did not fade. It became the central pillar of Silas's inner life, a secret sun around which his solitary days revolved. The forest no longer felt empty or merely wild. It felt watchful, protective. He grew older, his movements slower, his bones more brittle. The world outside his small clearing continued its noisy spin, but he remained in his quiet orbit. Then came a winter colder and harsher than any in recent memory. The snow fell for weeks, burying his cabin in a deep, white silence. It piled up against his door and windows, isolating him completely. He became a prisoner in his own home. His stockpile of firewood dwindled faster than he had anticipated, and the thought of wading through the chest-deep snow to cut more was an impossibility. He was old, and he was tired. He rationed his food. He kept the fire low, a mere flicker against the biting cold that seeped through the walls. A quiet resignation began to settle over him. Perhaps this was how his story was meant to end, claimed not by sickness or accident, but by the simple, impartial force of winter. He was too weak to fight it. One morning, after a night of deep, shivering cold, he awoke to a strange light filtering through his window. It took all of his strength to push open his front door against the drift of snow that had accumulated overnight. He peered out into the stark, white world, and he stopped. He could not believe what he was seeing. Stacked neatly on his porch, sheltered from the falling snow by the overhang of the roof, was a massive pile of firewood. The logs were thick and dry, perfectly cut, enough to last him the rest of the winter and beyond. And laid carefully beside the wood were two freshly killed deer. He stared, his mind refusing to comprehend. He looked out at the pristine, unbroken blanket of snow that surrounded his cabin. There were no tracks, not a single footprint leading to or from his porch. The delivery was impossible, a gift from the air itself. But he knew. He knew instantly. He looked past the clearing, toward the deep, silent woods. He scanned the snow-laden branches of the ancient pines, searching for a dark shape, for a pair of familiar, intelligent eyes. He saw nothing, but he felt them. He felt the same watchful presence he had felt for years. They had not forgotten. The debt had been remembered, and it had been repaid. A warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the promise of a roaring fire. It was the warmth of a connection that defied words, that spanned the gulf between two different worlds. He was not alone. He had never truly been alone. He raised a trembling hand, not in a wave, but in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. A quiet smile touched his lips for the first time in a long time. Into the cold, silent air, he whispered two words, letting the wind carry them into the trees. "Thank you."